to the second day after a very strong dose of knowledge yesterday. So, this session will include important topics for the region of the Gulf and the Arab Mashreq. The topics of energy, politics, economics are all intersectional topics and controversial topics when it comes to politics and influence. We will give each speaker 15 minutes to discuss their papers, and then we will uh, uh, have the opportunity afterwards to ask questions and discuss the three presentations. We will give an introduction about the panelists. Dr. Abdullah Ba'boud is a great intellect in Oman and at the Arab and international level. Dr. Naji and Dr. Badr Al Ibrahim. We will present full introductions of them. We'll start with Dr. Abdullah, who will give us his insights about the topics, and there are the details in his papers that he'll be shedding light on the Arab Mashreq economic corridors and these new dynamics among countries. You have 15 minutes, and then we will move on to Dr. Naji. Go ahead, please. Peace and God's mercy and blessings be upon you. Good morning. First, I'd like to thank the Gulf Studies Unit and the Arab Center for this and generous invitation. It is my pleasure to be here with you today and to speak about this topic with my colleagues. We will be talking about the impact of transformations in the Arab Mashreq on the region's energy map and economic corridors. I will try not to repeat things that were said before or that will be said later, because we have an energy expert on the panel, so I will not be focusing on energy, but I will touch upon it quite quickly. So I will be focusing on economic corridors particularly. So, as you know, there are major changes taking place in the world at the international level. There are economic changes, political changes, social changes as well as strategic changes. Yesterday, the panelists or some of the speakers talked about these major transformations, and they include the change in international trade. The main economic weight until recently was focused on the international map in the Atlantic Ocean, was focused in the Atlantic Ocean in the map. But this is a type of a calculation for the level of trade and trade exchange. So that weight was focused in the USA and Western Europe. In the recent years, this anchor or the suite is shifting to north of Iran and towards the east. So, what does this indicate to us? This indicates that there is a major uprising or renaissance economically in Asia, and that economic activity is moving east. And with this change, there are other transformations at the level of energy. You must have heard about alternative energy, carbon neutrality, and the energy trends worldwide, and the awakening or renaissance in energy in Asia right now has made the energy of the Gulf shift towards the east. There are also Western policies to limit uh, hydrocarbon energy and to limit the importation of energy from the east. And this has started long years ago after the 1973 um, a war and the Arab boycotting, so to a policy to limit importation from the East. So the energy trends nowadays and the energy exports from the Middle East is mostly shifting towards Asia, specifically China. And there are transformations at the level of international policies because economy is related to policy. And we talked a lot about the policy of the West vis-a-vis the region and how the region's states are trying to find for themselves an ecosystem or a sphere, a space for strategic maneuvering between the West and the East and to maintain their status and their independence. So, this is at the international level. At the regional level, everyone knows what happened and what is happening right now. There are major transformations taking place in the region. There is a rising role of the Gulf economically, politically. There are wars and conflicts taking place in the region. The major traditional forces or countries and the traditionally active Arab capitals such as Baghdad, Damascus, and even cities in Yemen are now in a state that is difficult. They need change, investment, and support for this unenviable situation. So there are transformations that are strategic, geostrategic, and political at the regional level and at political level, economic level, and social levels. So the Middle East remains a vital, a critical region for the world. And here I'm talking about the Middle East as a whole. The Middle East region is still vital and critical for the world. And its importance doesn't come only from it having from it being abundant with gas and energy, but because of its strategic location as well. So all colonialist powers historically have passed through this region and have occupied part of this region, and they were able to maintain these trade corridors, and they cut the trade relations that was existent between the Gulf, the region, and other Asian countries, and changed the shape of the trade and the balance of power. So, this region remains vital, important, and it's a link between Asia, Africa, and Europe. And this makes it a very important chain link. Between North Africa, Asia, and Europe. And for example, there were attempts to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el Mandab, Suez Channel, because these are choke points that are more sensitive, especially in maritime transportation internationally. Historically, also, as you are well aware, the uh, convoys have crossed the Silk Road to reach far countries, and the Arab Mashreq was a trade custom hub and station and passing route for the trade in spice. There were Damascus, Aleppo, Jerusalem, and Gaza that had a great role in the journeys of these convoys. And so, with the current changes, the Arab Mashriq still has a great role. And the Mediterranean is still a portal into the region, and the Arab Gulf is also a doorway or a port into the region, and the Red Sea was an alternative for the Suez Channel, and also the Arab Mashreq is a pivot that cannot be overlooked between Africa and Asia, and this has limited eased the burdens by 60% for these journeys or these routes. And so the region has gained extra strategic weight because of oil and gas. So we have the Jaffa route, Iraq Turkey corridor, the Arab tap line corridor, and the Strait of Hormuz, as well as the Red Sea and Bab al Mandeb Strait. So this led the major countries such as Russia, UK, France, and China compete in the region, and the Arab Mashreq was highlighted as a logistic region and a strategic corridor for supply chains. And we hear about the Silk Road, the Chinese policy in the region, which uses the ports, the Arab Gulf ports, for their trade. There is also intersection with other projects such as the IMEC project between India and the Middle East and arriving at Europe. And so this demonstrates that the region has a central and strategic position and location among all these continents, and controls sensitive maritime straits and channels, and has active cities. And the exploration or the discovery of oil and gas has added to its importance as its region for other projects as well, and it's connected to the international economy. There are important transformations in the region. There is recession of the nationalist state, and there we have non-state actors such as in Asia, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen, which to some extent, this caused the recession of the state and the protection of their economic corridors and borders, and affected the security of oil fields, and hindered or impeded supply chains in the region. There are major transformations happening. Turkey is expanding its influence in northern Syria, Iraq. It became a pivotal actor in energy corridors. Iran was able to invest in a network of influence from Tehran to the Mediterranean. Gulf countries turned from a political supporter into an investment economic actor that connects the Middle East with new investment projects. And there is international engagement by the USA, which is reshaping its existence in the regions, focusing on the security of the maritime corridors, and keeping China from dominating. And also, China is trying to enhance its influence through the Belt Initiative. And we have countries such as India that now has a trend or some action to have a role in the region. I will not go into details about gas in the Middle East because we have an energy expert, as I said. But just quickly, we may say that Iraq has become an arena for competitiveness for oil and ports. There's Al Basra Aqaba Road, Al Gafa corridor, which connects Turkey and Al Fao, and there is exportation of the gas in Kurdistan region via Turkey. And Baghdad is now confronting huge pressures between Gulf investments and Iranian influence. Syria, because of its location, is still an important corridor for energy from the Gulf into the Mediterranean, but the war and sanctions impeded its roles and created alternative corridors via Jordan. And there are the corridor projects in Iraq and Turkey, which enhances the role of Iraq and relieves some of the burdens on the maritime corridors that were affected during the Gaza war. The Indian corridor has great repercussions to the region. The Indian corridor was announced in 2023, and it was supposed to compete with the Silk Road to link India with Europe and India, the Gulf, and Israel via Saudi Arabia and Jordan. And it was part of a huge project for normalization. It aimed to economically diversify countries, reduce China's influence, and integrate Israel in the economy of the region. But this project is facing major challenges, political challenges mainly, not only because of the conflict in Gaza and the instability of Arab Israeli relationships, but also because the goal of it is unclear. And it comes 10 years after the Belt and Road Initiative, and it relies on several countries. And it's different from the Belt and Road Initiative, which relies on one country, which is China. And they paid a great deal of money to start it. And so this Indian economic corridor into the Middle East is facing many challenges, political challenges, challenges related to funding as well. And we can see that the Belt and Road Initiative focuses on ports in UAE, Oman, land connection between Oman and Turkey, and other energy initiatives and projects in Iraq. And this Chinese influence and extension makes it a strategic competitor of Washington and the West. The regional balances also had a great role. We now see competition between the Gulf region countries, especially the Gulf countries, which do not work as a group, but they compete on many levels in infrastructure, ports, renewable energy, trade corridors, in hegemony and dominating some ports in the region. And there is reshaping of the Turkish relationships with the Middle East and a change in the Iranian policy as a result of the war that took place. I conclude with some future scenarios. Are we going to see Gulf countries continuing their integrative journey? And yesterday we were talking about this integrated work, and there were doubts about it. And will integration become a reality, or will there be a disagreement? And will the GCC expand its system to include other countries such as Iraq, Yemen, Jordan, and other actors? And what is going to happen to the escalating Iranian Israeli tensions? What if the reconstruction in Syria and Iraq are impeded? And what if we have more risks to the security of maritime corridors? And also, what of the Indian Chinese competitiveness in the region with the Western support as well? What will be the shape of the region in the future? In conclusion, the transformations of the Arab Mashreq have redrawn the map of economic corridors in an in-depth, unprecedented manner. Conflicts change and reshape balances of power. There are new connectivity projects. There are competing regional forces and international forces that make this Mashreq a hub in international economy. These transformations are still open to many scenarios and many interpretations. It is hard to predict what is going to happen, but it is clear that the Arab Mashreq is no longer only a transit region. It is now pivotal, central in identifying, specifying the future of energy and trade worldwide. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah. Nice paper indeed. And you alluded to the trade routes from Asia to Iran to Russia to India and the changes in the energy market and also renewable energies, yet oil and gas remain as a main source of energy, and also the geopolitical changes. Some centers become peripheries, peripheries becoming centers, and the scenarios you mentioned, I'm sure, will raise many points for discussion. Now we are on the same path. We go to Dr. Naji. He is always present with us, and he'll be talking about the infrastructure point of view, energy links between the Gulf and the Mashreq, present status and future prospects. You have 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Yusuf. And thank you to Dr. Bishara, Dr. Marwan, and all the staff of the Arab Center for your kind hospitality. My paper is in English, but I'll speak in classical Arabic, not colloquial Lebanese. I will start first of all about the energy links between the Gulf region and the Levant, and sometimes called Arab Mashreq, sometimes called the Levant, and the oil pipes specifically, which link the Gulf region to the Levant. When the oil was discovered in the Gulf, it was linked with the Levant through pipelines, and the security of energy supplies was therefore dependent on the security of the region. But in view of the historical performance of these pipelines, we noticed that each line was closed at least once, and most of them remain closed until now. Let us take a look on the map. No problem. The, the oil pipeline started in 1932 with the Iraq Petroleum Company IPC from Kirkuk to Haifa, and this line was closed completely with the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. 1950, tap line was established between Saudi Arabia and Zahrani port on the Mediterranean, Lebanon, going through Jordan, Syria, the Golan Heights, in fact. This was closed in 1990 due to political reasons and transit fees. The pointer is not working, but the tap line is the red line here on the map. Tap line, it goes from the eastern province of Saudi Arabia to Zahrani. In 1952, the Kirkuk-Banyas pipeline was established with a secondary line to Tripoli in Lebanon. This line was closed also because of the rift between Iraq and Syria due to the Iran-Iraq war, and still closed until now. The top line is still closed. There was another line which was established in 1968 inside Israel from Eilat to Ashkelon, which was established with the support of the Shah of Iran, who wanted to export Iranian oil through this line, and he didn't want it to go through the Suez Canal. But with the fall of the Shah, this line was no longer operational. In the negotiations for the Abraham Accords, this matter was raised, and the possibility of the Emirates using this pipeline to export their oil through Israel. In 1967, the Kirkuk Jihan line was established, Jihan in Turkey, and still is operational with some problems though because of problems between Iraq and Turkey, and also because the pipeline goes through the Kurdish region. The Summit line also was established inside Egypt for the big tankers which cannot go through the Suez Canal. They empty in Ain Sukhna near the Gulf of Suez, and then they reload it after it goes through Summit pipeline. The Summit line is still operational. In 1980, in Saudi Arabia, a strategic petrol line was established between the eastern province and the Yanbu port. The main objective was not to rely on the Hormuz Straits to export Saudi oil through the Red Sea and not through the Gulf. This line is still operational and it's very important for Saudi Arabia. In 1986, another line from Kirkuk to Jihan was established, which is still operational with some problems. Then Iraq built a line across Saudi Arabia, which goes in parallel with petrol line. They called it IPSA, the Iraqi pipeline through Syria, but it was used for a short period because of problems between Iraq and Syria. Saudi Arabia nationalized the line and still not operational. Through what we said just now, we can gather that the security aspect is very important, and the main reasons for the closure of many of these pipelines, exporting pipelines, is the political conflicts inside the producing countries or through countries of transit or because of conflicts between countries. Because most of these pipelines have fallen victim to the political conflicts in the region. Despite all of this and despite some of the positive developments of late, I'm being a little bit optimistic here in this scenario, and I say, inshallah, God willing, maybe the entire region can enter a period of peace which can include most of its countries. And if this happens, it will revive real hopes of a new era of cooperation in linking energy between the Gulf region and the Levant. And this peace can lead to reopening of some of the closed lines and maybe build new lines like the line from Iraq to Jordan to Aqaba specifically. And even so, the reopening of closed lines is not just the subject, it's not subject to political will, but it's also to economic consideration and the demands of the market. Maybe Gulf countries may not be in need of exporting more oil through these pipelines because the markets will already be saturated in Europe and the need will be to Asia in the coming decades. What about gas pipelines between the Gulf and the Levant? In fact, no gas line was established which links the Gulf region with the Levant, and even inside the Gulf region itself, only few gas lines were established, like the Dolphin line, which is the only operational one which links Qatar, the UAE, and Oman, and the Iraq to Kuwait line, which did not last for long. The Iraq to Kuwait gas line was the first, which was built in 1986, but because of Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, the line stopped, and Saddam Hussein used the pipeline to supply his troops in Kuwait with water, and unfortunately, the pipe is still closed. And there is a line which links Egypt to Israel. Unfortunately, Egypt used to export gas export it to Israel, but they discovered that they don't have a surplus. Now Israel exports gas to Egypt at very higher prices. There is the Arab gas line, which goes through Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And there is some old plans to link that with Turkey. But this line is not operational because there is no surplus energy in Egypt to be exported. Maybe an era of peace, if it happens, can revive ideas of establishing gas pipelines linking the Gulf to the Levant, like the line between Qatar and Turkey. As for lines going through westwards or going to Iraq, as for the pipeline linking Qatar to Egypt through the Gulf of Aqaba, reaching Europe through linkages with the Libyan and Algerian lines in North Africa. There was also talk of a gas line linking the Gulf and the Levant, which was planned to enable Qatar and Abu Dhabi to supply the Levant with natural gas. In the 1990s, it was suggested that Middle East gas tube, which is made up of four main parts, and the design required it reaching its sources in Iran, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and other countries to provide gas for many poor countries. In 2011, Iran suggested a pipeline from far south, which is shared with Qatar to provide Syria and Iraq with gas, and Lebanon also through a secondary line. We saw lately that gas lines were established between Iran, Basra, and Baghdad. It's worth mentioning here a very creative project which started this year to transfer Qatari LNG to Aqaba and then to South Damascus. This project has stopped for many reasons, but I think there is hope now that this can be restored and the period of peace in the Middle East can revive many of these projects and they will be offered once again, and many of these pipelines can be linked with already existing infrastructure like the Arab gas plant and the Egyptian gas lines. We know there are liquefaction stations on the Mediterranean. They are not used the Egyptian gas, but the Israeli gas. And we see that it's important for the Gulf and the Levant and the Middle East in general to enhance this trade, the gas trade. Of course, this will reflect a strong political will to cooperate. One quick word about the waterways. Dr. Abdullah mentioned them, but I just want to say something in this regard that the maritime waterways in the Middle East, some have been established which led to the shores of the Arab Sea, Red Sea, and the Mediterranean, and to provide alternative ports to the Gulf ports and minimize the reliance on the Suez Canal, Bab el Mandeb, and the Straits of Hormuz, despite the fact that the maritimes are still exposed and to danger and threats. But we hope that an era of peace maybe will restore their importance. I don't have time to talk about linking electric grids, but it's in the paper. I'll leave it here. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Excellent paper, Doctor, and thank you for presenting your paper, which connected the critical infrastructure of energy, be it oil pipelines or gas pipelines, and there is a correlation between the work of these pipelines and the various tensions, and also the scenario of peace and these pipelines coming back into commission and being a reason for stability in the region. I'm sure there will be a great deal of discussion about that. So, moving on to the third topic, which is with Dr. Badr Al Ibrahim, who is a very well known expert in this regard. You have 15 minutes and then we will start receiving questions and remarks. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Arab Center for giving me this opportunity. There is continuous talk. There has been continuous talk throughout this year about opportunities for increasing influence of actors, specifically state members of the GCC and the Arab Mashreq, especially with the regression of Iran and the fall of Al Assad regime in Syria. And I believe it's necessary to highlight some points in this framework to understand what are the opportunities and how we can interpret them into a reality that reflects more influence of these countries in the Arab Mashreq and an increasing role for these countries in the Arab Mashreq. And I have a lengthy research paper about this, but I will be highlighting certain points in this short intervention or presentation. And this might open the door or the horizons for questions. First, I'll start by speaking about the external roles of these countries. Why are they assuming roles outside their borders? So what are the factors and drivers that push them in that direction? There are two factors. First, the security concerns of these countries. These are conservative regimes and countries that have concerns of other regimes that have revolutionary slogans, transborder movements, even if they are leftist or Islamist, and they have concerns about one another that are interpreted into a competitiveness at the level of the region in various arenas or landscapes, as we know. This is one factor. The other factor is the alliance with the USA. And this leads to these countries assuming roles in the framework, within the framework of the alliance with the USA. This has happened in the Cold War and still happening now. And it's not exclusive to the Arab region only, it happens in various regions around the world. And there are other factors related to seeking economic benefits and so on and so forth. But these roles have led to influence and impact of these countries in the Arab neighborhood and in their periphery regions. And in many cases, it wasn't at the level of the influence of other competitors, other regional competitors. And this was the main complaint during the past years, and this is attributed to the management of capacities and the tools that are being used in achieving this kind of influence. And of course, there are details regarding what has happened recently, but it's important to understand what are the strengths that enhance the opportunities of these countries having influence and what are the weaknesses that might impede them from having influence in this region. Of course, Gulf countries have strengths. There is political stability, there is financial surplus, and this is well known. And this is interpreted into an economic power and soft power at the media level. And there are other points that are considered weaknesses or put limitations to this influence, such as the lack of military powers for these countries, their dependency on the US protection of their security, and their dependency on oil, which makes them contingent upon its fluctuating prices. And these countries lack the demographic weight as well. And so these are factors that might be weaknesses. Accordingly, I believe that it is possible to ask the question, is it possible for Gulf countries to practice more extensive influence, more sustainable influence in the Arab Mashreq during this period of time? I believe that the key for sustainable, instillable influence in the Arab Mashreq is to have a vision or a project, because you cannot conceptualize a deep rooted, extensive, sustainable influence if it is just reactive to other people's project and an attempt to impede other people's projects just to deter security threats, but rather you need to have an alternative project, a project that takes the place of the projects of your competitors. And given the strengths that I have mentioned, the project that might be sustainable is based on reconsidering the crises of the Arab Mashreq in another way, meaning that we need to think about the post-World War II regime validity, and also uh, revising the possibility of having the pan-Arab state as we used to think about it, and also dealing with the region as one region without any attempt to deal with it as the current geographic, given the current geographic borders that have no real meaning anymore. So, based on that, we can revisit working to establish an economic Arab bloc between the Arab Peninsula and the Arab Mashreq. This bloc would be based on directing the Gulf capitals to invest in productive sectors such as transformative sectors, agriculture, innovation, and technology. Instead of investing in sectors, we know that many Gulf countries' embassies are investing in real estate and tourism in other Arab countries to get quick revenues, quick profits. But I believe that they should direct these capitals towards productive sectors to marry the financial surplus in the Gulf, the efficiencies in the Arab Mashriq and from the Gulf as well, in order to establish a state of economic prosperity in the region that directly benefits the Gulf countries. So, what is the importance and feasibility of this project for Gulf countries? First, it achieves sustainable influence in the Arab Mashriq by using what is called reciprocal dependency. This is a theory by Joseph Nye and Robert Keehan that is dependent on the fact that in reciprocal relations between countries, economic relations, one party is inferior to the other because one of them is more dependent on the other. So the less dependent party here would be the Gulf countries, and accordingly, they might draw the route for this relationship for their best interest. And this project creates a middle class, an extensive middle class in the Arab Mashriq with the common interests with the Gulf countries and the productive projects that provide job opportunities, high paying, high wages jobs, and long term projects in the Arab Mashriq, unlike construction and contracting projects that provide jobs with little wages, and they are temporary and end by the end of the building or the finalization of the construction. And so we might establish a framework for this project, and Gulf countries might have an edge vis-a-vis other competitors such as Iran and Turkey. Third, this project achieves economic diversification for Gulf countries away from oil rentiers. So, because it doesn't focus on rentier activities that are organically related to oil, but moving on to a productive situation, a productive project. And this cannot be achieved by Gulf countries alone. They need to be integrated in their surrounding Arab region in this framework. What are the key challenges of this project? There are many challenges, and just to I'll give you an overview because I don't have enough time. First, the Israeli situation is the key challenge at this time in the Arab Mashriq, and the hostilities, the Israeli hostilities in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, and it's one region. We cannot separate these files from each other. We ask three questions here. Is normalization with Israel, what is so called normalization with Israel, is it beneficial? Israel has always represented itself or introduced itself, always tries to introduce itself to the Gulf as the quick bridge towards benefits or gains with Washington. If you want gains in the USA and bigger benefits, cross through Tel Aviv. I believe that this is misleading. The Gulf countries have strong relationships with the USA, and they are able to get many gains with the USA without resorting to normalization with Israel. If we talk about the situation of Saudi Arabia specifically and the prerequisites or conditions for normalizations that they presented, we can find that everything that was mentioned is not. Urgent for the Saudi Arabia. First, and these conditions will not be a guarantor for U.S. intervention in a case of any crisis. And Saudi Arabia tried a way that proved to be successful, which is regional arrangements. So, for example, the Iranian Saudi rapprochement with this Chinese sponsorship, and this has neutralized it in the war in the past 2 years, especially the Israeli-Iranian war last summer. So I believe that it is clear that this is not an urgent need, and protection can be provided to Saudi Arabia without that agreement. Also, the nuclear agreement, it is well known that there is an Israeli American red line regarding uranium enrichment by Iran. This remains unclear. Also, another challenge is related to advanced weapons and AI. The F-35 issue that has happened recently, regardless of whether these planes will be handed over and whether they will be at the same features that were handed over to Israel. However, the principal approval of that is also an indication of the Gulf states' ability to get gains from the USA without going through normalization. Also, I believe it's odd to say that Israel has technological advancements and things that are related to the technological prosperity that is worth networking with them by Arab countries. But all of what is happening in Israel is organically connected or associated with the USA. The USA has innovation in AI; it's pioneering. China is competing with it, and by the end of the day, the kingdom and other Gulf states have agreements and deals with Nvidia and other AI companies, and they are capable of having all of that without going through Tel Aviv. So I believe that when it comes to the benefits of normalization, it is misleading and overrated. And is the Israeli case impeding Gulf influence in the Mashreq? Yes, the Israeli hostilities will annul any benefit of economic influence of the Gulf countries and put more burdens on them. Each time there are hostilities in Syria and Lebanon, this causes burdens to Gulf countries later. And so we need to confront that. Third question: are there tools to deal with the Israeli challenge in the Arab Mashreq for Gulf countries? I do not want to repeat what is always being said about an oil ban or reactivating an oil ban. Uh, there's something that it surprises me that it's not doesn't get discussed enough, which is the Gulf sovereign funds, which could be selective. It could be selective in establishing partnerships with the West in an attempt to pressure Israel to stop its hostilities in the Arab Mashreq, in Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon. The Gulf companies open completely to Western companies can be selective with in dealing with these companies, and so they can allow companies that are not directly associated with Israel or supporting Israel to work in the Gulf, in these Gulf markets. And so I believe that it is possible, it's not completely fictional, it is possible to push towards an Arab boycott in all of its levels, because there are countries that did not boycott Israel in any way. So there are tools, economic tools, and there are direct relationships with the USA, and we can use them to work seriously. And here I'm talking about a direct benefit to the Gulf countries in this regard. We can work seriously to stop the Israeli hostility. I conclude by saying that Israel is doesn't want to have partnerships, equal level partnerships with Gulf countries. They want Gulf countries to be ATMs for them, to benefit from them financially and continue with their military security barbarity and their political hegemony in the Arab Mashreq in a way that is suitable for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Badr. Very distinguished paper, and the concerns you mentioned are very apparent, and you specifically talked about the security concerns, then the competitiveness with the rest of the world and between the countries, and also alliances with the United States. And also, the challenge lies in the fact that there should be a joint vision by the Gulf region and economic diversification in a way that can achieve gains, joint gains for all of the Gulf countries. You also mentioned challenges like the Israeli case, the Israeli aggression, and as an obstacle hindering the Gulf integration. I thank the speakers. They respected the timeline. We take the first round of questions. Let's start from the top there on the left hand side. You'll all have your chance to ask. Please identify yourself and make your question pointed and say to whom you're addressing the question. Amjad Jibril, I am a researcher in regional affairs. This is a general question to all the speakers. Are we expecting a peace scenario for the entire region, or a state of chaos for the entire region? The later variable is the Israeli involvement, and I think I noticed that Dr. Naji is optimistic about peace with Israel. I cannot say it will not happen for sure, but we are not in a state of peace. Maybe some agreement, some truce, some partial things, but Israel wants to has its entire hegemony on the entire region and impose its will. How can there be peace after that? And also, we have to include this is a geopolitical issue, and we have to involve the political aspect. In this region, politics leads the way, not economics. Maybe for some exception with the Gulf areas, because the political, there are so many unions before in the Arab region and in the South, the GCC, the United Arab Republics and things, and even the GCC after the blockade on Qatar is no longer the same. And also, what happens outside the region the West, for example, they will not accept any sort of Turkey and Iran getting closer to each other. And the more independent this region becomes, the more annoyed and agitated the West will be. So I think there should be some sort of uh, no, if there's normalization, it should be between Turkey, Iran, and the Arab region to isolate Israel. And after the failure of the Arab revolutions, there is some sort of stagnation. They, they used to say that Egypt and Syria are at the heart of the Arab world. They are both absent. And also the influence of the Gulf itself. The Gulf countries themselves talk about soft power, not hard power. This means that the influence is not like, for example, they supported Egypt for 10 years and the Sisi regime, but nothing it was achieved afterwards. Good morning. Regarding the Haifa port, there is a plan to turn the Haifa port into an energy hub for the West Asia region, and the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and others said they wanted to make Haifa port the central port for energy in the region. How can we talk about other pipelines or anything which have been impacted for many, many years with this idea now? And then the Haifa now port, and it has also the G20, which will be accompanied by oil pipelines, and the Haifa refinery, which has a capacity of 71 million a year. And so, why should Israel want peace if eventually all these wars that it causes achieves its objectives? My question is to Dr. Naji regarding the pipeline. What is why should Egypt buy gas from Israel, where there are all these Arab countries which export gas, Algeria, Qatar, and others? Is it due to the Palestinian cause? And despite the political upheaval, there is enough capacity in the Arab gas markets to supply Egypt. Why do they have to buy it from Israel? A very thorough papers. In the past, I wrote about the 20th century when this area was designed. The Arabs were not present. Now, in the 21st century, the same thing is happening, and we're not present. And secondly, we have to think in terms of the future, not the past. There is no doubt that the nation state, which was established 1916 and 1920, and now it's a necessity to protect our identities before we get into the greater Middle East, which will divide what is already divided. When someone say that the Gulf and the Arab Mashreq as if they are two separate things, I'm a bit sensitive to that. And when we faced with Israel and its allies, in my opinion, this cannot be done except through a regional alliance. I published in Saudi Arabia a paper calling for Turkey, Pakistan, Iran, and the Gulf and some Arab countries like Egypt. We really need to think in regional terms again. And this is a question to Dr. Ibrahim. Can we say, in view of this isolation, this political development, and moving away from ideologies, can we achieve a state of balance which can impose on the West and the Europe what we want and not what they want to impose on us? The lady there, please. Thank you for all the papers. Thank you that you restored some hope of resistance after all this empathy with the current situation in other papers. My question to Dr. Abdullah, you made me think that we live in a colonial era, which is true, but this time around, this colonial era is done in cooperation with the countries which are being colonialized. What happened in Gaza and what we used to hear about an American, Israeli, Saudi, Egyptian, Emirati uh, project, economic project to turn this area into one network, to turn Gaza into a port, to have an alternative to the Suez Canal. Maybe what we're seeing is just preparing the ground to rebuild Gaza according to a new colonial plan in cooperation with countries which get their legitimacy from the United States in order to achieve the interests of everybody else except the people of the region. السلام عليكم علوي المشهور. And honestly, with my respect for all the papers, more, more, most of the papers were just repeating a narration of what's happening without providing some new thinking. After all, most of the attendees are aware of what has happened. We were expecting something new, something maybe except Dr. Badr's paper, which provided some sort of a vision for the complex interdependence between the Gulf and the Mashreq. Now, with the retreat of the Iranian presence and the American presence, will create a new conflict between the role the Gulf are trying to play and the role Turkey wants to play again, which is closer to the region. Turkey has a big role in Syria and in Iraq. Economically speaking, Tur- Turkey is closer to Iraq than Iran. The other thing is Iran's retreat, which has been repeated many times. Nobody said how we should deal with that. I think Iran is similar to Europe from the Franco-German war and Churchill and de Gaulle after World War II immediately said that Germany should be accommodated without letting it disintegrated, not to make it feel isolated, to cause chaos again in Europe. So in your paper, You talk about this new liberal institutionalism in the region. How do you think Turkey and Iran will not allow the Gulf countries to replace them in the Mashreq? How can we contain Iran and Turkey to turn them into a positive contributor to, without or not allowing them to hinder our process? Because the Gulf countries may have a surplus in money, but Turkey and Iran have bigger influence. Thank you. So to make Iraq a window to East Asia and Turkey and a window to Europe. We get all the questions. I've been hearing since yesterday that this question is being repeated. What can the elites in the Gulf countries to do to move the area from this period of I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I'm talking about how we can rise again. We have a structural failure in the political uh, projects. There is very weak coordination when it comes to economy, and the major projects are permanently stagnated. The the last beneficiary is the Gulf citizen. The integration is just something of the elite. It has not been turned into a social contract. I think I don't think we should give up on the dream of turning this Gulf into an area built on integration. But we cannot do that without independent institutes, binding mechanisms, and then thank you very much. It's an important point. Thank you. Please, please be brief. We went beyond the time limit, so we don't want to be very late. What Dr. Mr. Badr said is the ambition to be an integration between the Gulf countries and the Arab Mashreq. I agree that the Gulf is part of the Arab Mashreq, but does the GCC have the ability, the strategy, the willingness to move independently than the Israeli project, which is very clear to everyone, and also the Arab Mashreq in this current fragmented situation? Can they resist this American Israeli hegemony to enter into a partnership with the GCC? This is the question. Good morning. I didn't want to comment. I didn't want to do that because we entered into deep contradictions. But I was hoping that Dr. Naji he gave us a good idea, but we took we Qatar is the biggest transferer of LNG with the biggest fleet of tankers, 68 tankers. Although they have some technical problems, they need heating to return the liquefied gas into gas, etc. But all the choices you mentioned are not operational now. The, the political chaos really would annoyed me that we're talking about Israel as if it is a choice. Only the doctor said when he talked about the psychological barriers, those who are talking about the Abraham Accord. I visited the American embassy and I discussed it with. I said it has two faces. It's political. Some countries can take their own decisions. The other aspect is religious, and this is blasphemy, clear, apparent, blatant blasphemy. We cannot accept that for the sake of politics. We are not talking here about a choice, and we talk about it quietly. Dr. Abdullah Ba'abu talked about competition and integration between Gulf countries. Dr. Badr Ibrahim talked about the sovereign fund to achieve Gulf sovereign funds to achieve political. I remember in the first crusade, the, the Pope protested against the the Christian cities who traded with Muslim countries and they got together. They posed the question, are we Christians first or are we traders first? This is the question we should ask. Are we Gulf people or traders? We can continue the question. I give 2 minutes each to we start with you, Dr. Badr. Thank you very much. Just quick comments because we don't have time. But the comments are really important. They warrant more discussion, but the lack of time is always the problem. We're talking about the Mashreq, but definitely Egypt is included. And the investments in Egypt in the last decade or so, all these deposits, and this is a fact that there were not any result. And also in Egypt, was property and tourism non-productive sectors. So therefore, we should review our investment strategy for for the Gulf countries to be of benefit to our own citizens and the citizens in the country we invest in. Just to clarify things, I say rebuilding the nation state in the same style of the Sykes-Picot. Today, Iraq is a clear example. Saddam Hussein's regime fell 20 years ago, but the state could not stand up on its feet again. Syria is, to restore the country as it was is very difficult. What I'm saying is not to fragment these countries, but they should open up and Gulf countries should open up on economic choices because no country can rise again on its own. Syria today cannot rise again on its own. They need this integration with the Arab region. So we have to think. I'm not saying this is a dream. I'm talking about salvation of these countries, salvation of the GCC from a developmental point of view. The development is linked to cooperation with Egypt and the Mashreq countries. And these countries need the Gulf money. And so this is a question of salvation, not just theory and dreaming. As for Iran and Turkey, I agree entirely with this idea. Linking with Turkey and Iran is important, but there should be an Arab project first, and there are points of weakness and points of strength in each regional player, whether Iran or Turkey, it's all the same. The, the Gulf countries do not have the same military capabilities, but they have economic power and they can lay down bridges with Turkey and Iran. But they have to be present in the Mashreq to be able to bargain with Turkey and Iran. Dr. Naji, thank you. In my paper, I wanted to say that the infrastructure of linking the Gulf to the Arab Mashreq is present. But what it lacks is an environment of peace and clear political will. Was I optimistic? No, no. The scenario is to have peace and all these projects to be put down on the table. I'm not that optimistic. I'm from Lebanon, after all. But as for Haifa, the projects in Haifa, uh, it relies on the Israeli gas offshore. There is need for an oil supply. When Saddam Hussein fell, one of the projects that at that time, which was talked about in the media, was to revive the Kirkuk Haifa line because it's very important. The Kirkuk Haifa line is non existent now because the pipeline itself was deteriorated so much that it's no longer viable. But Israel has gas, but which is it's exporting to Egypt, but it needs oil. Why Arab countries do not supply Egypt with LNG? Because gas through pipelines is cheaper, and Israel has an abundance of gas, but they do not have the ability to export it until now, whereas Egypt needs this gas. So there is a joint need here, and of course, there is an American interference to make this integration in gas supplies between Egypt and Israel. Finally, you are right, sir, that LNG is, is a safer way of exporting or importing gas, and we see Kuwait, Dubai, Bahrain, they all have LNG stations to import LNG. But if we're talking about real integration, then the pipeline will provide the LNG you can import from Russia. When Kuwait built the first station for LNG, did not bring LNG from Qatar, although it's close, they brought it from Russia. Many questions we cannot respond to them all, but I'll say some quick points. First, we have to recognize that the official Arab order is dead and buried, and only God knows what will happen afterwards. When we look at the Arab region now, we see that most Arab regions go through different stages from either failed states to unstable states to states which are a bit more stable, which are the Gulf countries, and this has come through the intellectual background, the leadership, and the presence of oil and gas, which help these countries to be stable. We have to understand in our Gulf countries that we cannot be part of development, prosperity, and stability in an area full of upheavals. The area around us is full of upheavals, so Gulf countries have to understand that whether it's on interdependability or on this is a theory which has its own dimensions. Even from a security point of view, you cannot live in islands of prosperity in a sea of upheaval. And after the aggression, the Israeli aggression on Qatar, this has become apparent, and also the Iranian aggression on Qatar also has showed us that we are part of this area or this group, and we have to work with each other to achieve peace and stability. Have we failed? Yes. Where is the Arab League? Where are their projects and all the Arab integration projects? Gulf projects for integration, they are by and large failed, but compared to the Arab League, relatively speaking, they are successful, but they have huge failures. Not because the Gulf region, the people do not want to work with each other, no, but it's due to the independence way of thinking and the nation states' willingness to keep independent, because integration is not easy. It has many dimensions, like losing your uh, sovereignty. We know we live in countries which really are very jealous in guarding their sovereignty. There are many projects, but our projects failed, and I'm not uh, telling you a secret here. There are projects by other countries, and that is to integrate Israel into the region. So the question is asked: this air, this area is not just exclusively Arab. There is Iran, Turkey. So why call them Arab? Why have the Arab League? They are not all Muslims. Why do we call it the Islamic Cooperation Council? So why can't we have an regional organization which includes Israel? This has been talked about for many, many years, and many people took part in it. They want to exploit our weakness and disintegration to impose Israel on us. I'll close by saying that there is an Arab peace or initiative, and I attended seminars on this. There is no problem in accepting Israel in the region because there is an Arab peace initiative. The question is, does Israel want peace, and does Israel want to live in peace? This is the question that the West or Israel or others could answer, and the genocide in Gaza has proven that they do not want peace, and Israel's project is much bigger than that. Now there are other projects like the Iranian project and the Turkish project, but what is important, this area cannot live and exist without this cooperation. We do not lack the will of our people, but we lack the political will to really protect the area from all these conflicts. Even at the level of the Gulf countries, we have many defects. Thank you very much. Finally, we thank the speakers, and we thank you for your